Welcome, everybody. This is Barbara Kennedy here with Susie Coltrus from the English Learner Support Division here at the Texas Education Agency. Thank you so much. We have almost 200 participants right now on our webinar with more to come. The title of our presentation today is Further Updates on the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA State Plan, Title III, Part A. And we are glad to have you back, and we are fully aware that some of you, we hope, previously participated in this webinar, and we will be building upon what we shared in our last webinar. Some of the information will be repeated, but there will be additional information that was not shared last time, as well as more detailed information and updates. So the purpose of our webinar today is to provide Education Service Centers, ESCs, and school districts further clarification and information on the Texas ESSA State Plan, Title III, Part A section, which was approved by the U.S. Department of Education, referred in this presentation today as the USDE, on March 27th, 2018. So that's one update, is that we did get the Texas ESSA State Plan in totality approved by the USDE on March 27th. The format for today is much like our last webinar presentation. It is a live webinar presentation, but it is in listener mode only. The live webinar presentation will be recorded so that stakeholders may listen to it at a later time. We ask that you type your questions and comments into the JOT form at the link listed on your screen, which is https://FORM://80516023001134. And you will notice that this reference to the JOT form is going to appear at the bottom of each of our slides today. In addition, you'll see a QR code at the lower right-hand corner of your screen, which you may also use to access the form to submit your questions and comments. The English Learner Support Team will create and post to the web, if needed, another frequently asked questions document in response to your questions posed today and to provide further clarification. Our topics today for today's agenda are: number 1, English Learner Identification Window; number 2, Single Statewide Assessments; number 3, English Learner Reclassification Rubric; and number 4, Conclusion. Here you'll see an updated timeline. The slide shows a timeline of the Texas ESSA State Plan development and implementation. As shared in our last webinar, the ESSA State Plan was submitted to the USDE for initial review in December of 2016 after collecting stakeholder input. The TEA received feedback from the USDE on the draft plan in December of 2017. The TEA revised the ESSA State Plan and resubmitted to the USDE for final approval in January of 2018. And the Texas ESSA State Plan gained final USDE approval in March of 2018. This slide shows us the prompt provided by the USDE for us to respond to in the section on the ESSA State Plan Title III Part A. And this is just to remind us of the prompt that we responded to, with the highlighted words that we need to provide an assurance that all students who may be English learners are assessed for such status within 30 days of enrollment in a school in the state. In order to comply with the USDE's requirement that each state provide or utilize standardized statewide program entrance procedures, we, in the proposed Texas ESSA State Plan, which has now been accepted and approved, we have proposed the state assures that all students will be identified as English learners or non-English learners as appropriate within 4 weeks of enrollment. As shared in our previous discussion and webinar, Texas currently holds school districts accountable for identifying students as English learners within 20 school days of enrollment. Statute, namely TEC 29.053, subsection B, requires that school districts determine the number of English learners on each campus and then classify them according to the language in which the student possesses primary proficiency within 4 weeks of enrollment. ESSA requires assurances that students are identified as English learners or non-ELs as appropriate within 30 days of enrollment. And therefore, beginning in the 2018-2019 school year, Texas school districts will be required to identify English learners within 4 weeks of enrollment. And these are calendar weeks. As we can see, we are going back to the original language of TEC 29.053 subsection B of 4 weeks as the window for identifying English learners to be in full compliance with the 30 days requirement of the USDE under ESSA. Also, in the same prompt of the ESSA State Plan Title III Part A section, we are required to demonstrate to the USDE that we have a standardized statewide entrance procedure and a standardized statewide exit procedure. So we're going to look now a little more deeply at this. For the standardized statewide program entrance procedure, our plan states, in accordance with Texas Education Code TEC 29.056, subsection A, 1, 2, and 3, if the language on the Home Language Survey, or HLS, indicates that a language other than English is used in the home, the student is evaluated using the TEA-approved English Language Proficiency Test. Texas currently allows for school districts to select from a list of approved tests a language proficiency test of their choice to use for identification of program entrance decisions. Beginning in the school year 2019-20, and let me repeat, that's school year 2019-20, school districts will need to use a single TEA-approved test for identification and program entrance to ensure that the program entrance procedure is standardized statewide under the definitions of ESSA. The TEA is developing a process for selecting the TEA-approved test for program entrance, and test selection will be conducted in timely and meaningful consultation with stakeholders, reflecting the geographic diversity of the state. Furthermore, to ensure that Texas has a standardized statewide program exit procedure, the ESSA State Plan proposes that determination of English proficiency and recommendation for program exit are made upon the following standardized exit criteria in accordance with TEC as listed. These include the current results from the state's annual English proficiency test, the test for language proficiency, the Texas Language Proficiency Assessment System, or TELPAS. As mentioned earlier, for entrance decisions, Texas currently allows for school districts also to select from the list of approved tests a language proficiency test of their choice to use for program exit decisions. This is current practice that has been in place for a number of years. Once again, beginning in the school year 2019-2020, school districts will need to utilize a single TEA-approved test, TELPAS, for program exit decisions in order to assure that the program exit procedure is standardized statewide. You'll notice a clarifying note at the bottom of this slide stating that the writing portion of the TELPAS will serve as the TEA-approved criterion referenced written test for exit criteria at all grade levels, including grades 4, 7, 9, and 10. Let's take a moment to look at the process the TA is using for selection of a single statewide test beginning in the 2019-2020 school year. And I would like to point out one more time, this will be applicable in the 2019-2020 school year, not the upcoming school year 2018-2019. And as I mentioned in the previous webinar, we were very fortunate to have received the approval of the USDE in granting us one extra year to implement this shift toward the use of a single statewide test for entrance and exit, because originally the USDE wanted all of these changes to be made for the 2018-19 school year. But after a lot of negotiating, we were able to secure from the USDE the ability to postpone this particular part of the Texas ESSA State Plan, Title I Part A section, this component of it, one more year to the 2019-2020 school year. So let's take a look at the process for selecting those tests. The TEA will make a request for proposals, an RFP, to select 2 assessments to be used statewide starting in the 1920 school year. The first is a request for proposals for a language proficiency test that will test reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills for English learner identification and program entry, grades pre-K through 12. In addition, the TEA will make an RFP, a request for proposals, to select, number 2, a norm-referenced achievement test for program exit for students in non-STAR and non-EOC grades. In other words, English learners enrolled in grades 1, 2, 11, and 12. Just a reminder that the exit criteria in the state of Texas for English learners to be reclassified as no longer in need of services are outlined very clearly in statute in TEC 29. And they include a number of exit criteria. And so in order to fulfill the requirements of ESSA and the Texas ESSA State Plan, Title III Part A, as well as be in compliance with TEC 29 state statute, it will be necessary for the TEA to make a request for proposals for these 2 classifications of tests for use in the 1920 school year. Let's take a look at the process that is already underway here at the TEA for making that request for proposals. The TEA is currently in the process of developing a means for gathering stakeholder input via an e-survey regarding desirable features and characteristics of tests that we can use to identify and exit learners, English learners. And this survey, this e-survey that will be disseminated out to stakeholders at ESCs and in school districts, is under development now and should be disseminated sometime in the spring or very, very early summer. This will provide stakeholders across the state the opportunity to voice their needs and their desires and their opinions with regard to the features and characteristics of the tests to be selected. This information will be used to inform the writing of the solicitation to test vendors. And so you'll see the next step, bullet 2, is that we at the TEA will solicit test vendors through RFPs in the summer and fall of this year, 2018. TEA will then review the test vendor RFP submissions once the solicitation window has closed, and will form an RFP evaluation committee, which will consist of staff here at the TEA along with stakeholders in order to select the vendor or vendors to provide these tests. We anticipate that the RFP evaluation committee will be in the position to select the vendor or vendors in the late fall or early winter 2018, or beginning of 2019. The selected test vendor or vendors will then contract with the LEAs for test sales, test administrator training, etc. in the spring of 2019, we anticipate, in time for full implementation of the new tests in the 2019-2020 school year. Please understand that this process has approximate dates because we are still in the process of developing the pieces that to inform this process. But we wanted to share with you an overall glimpse of what the process for selecting the single statewide tests will be in the upcoming months. Another piece of information we wanted to share with you today that we feel might be helpful for you in visualizing what these new assessments will look like and how they will impact our work in 2019 and 20 is by providing this chart. And so we have here a chart with the title criteria, or a slide with the title Criteria for Reclassification in 2019-2020. This chart is entitled 2019-2020 English Learner Reclassification Criteria. I do want to make a note of the use of the word reclassification on this chart and in this slide, just to let you know that we are moving toward using this term reclassification to denote the process by which students who are at one time English learners but then meet all of the criteria for what we normally call exit to be then reclassified as English fluent students, or students who are no longer English learners. This process is called reclassification, and we want to use this word, this term, very clearly to denote that change in the classification status of the child, as opposed to the term exit, which implies that a student is exiting from a program and leaving all programs, services, or participation behind. As you may well know, statute permits that parents may request that their child, even after reclassification as no longer English learner, they may request that their child continue to participate in an English learner program, be it an ESL or bilingual program. And at the district's discretion, that may be accommodated. That desire on the parent's part may be accommodated. For that reason, we want to make clear the difference between reclassification and exit. And so I just wanted to explain that here. The other piece is that we are really working to refer to our English learners as English learners, rather than simply a student, as in the student exit criteria, which was the language we used in our ESSA State Plan. So I'm just trying to connect for you that the student exit criteria and the English learner reclassification criteria mean the same thing, but we're kind of moving away from the ESSA language and toward our Texas statewide language by using the term English learner reclassification criteria. That being said, let's look at the chart, and we'll see that this chart shows across the top grade levels, first, second, all the way through 12th. And then on the left-hand column, we have the types of assessments or criteria that are required in statute TEC 29. So the first criteria is an English language proficiency assessment, and we will be, as mentioned previously, as well as in the previous webinar, we will be moving in 1920 to the use of the TELPAS for this piece or this component of the reclassification criteria. It will be required starting in 1920 that students are scored or rated on the TELPAS with advanced high in listening, speaking, reading, and writing in order to fulfill that piece or component of the reclassification criteria. We have received questions. Does this mean the student needs advanced high in each of those 4 domains? at all grade levels, including grade levels where previously students' writing scores were taken from the STAR assessment and or EOC. And the answer is yes, this is correct. TELPAS Advanced High in each of the 4 domains will fulfill that piece of the exit criteria at all grade levels. Next on the chart, directly below the English Language Proficiency Assessment, we find the State Standardized Reading Assessment. This again comes from TEC 29 statute. This is not a part of the ESSA state plan or criteria that is federally mandated. It is in accordance with statute at the state level, but we include it on the chart here for your ease in picturing how a student gets reclassified in Texas starting in 2019-20. And so we see that in first and second grade, well, let's go start with most grades, any grades where a STAR assessment or an EOC is administered. So that means, as we can see on the chart, STAR in grades 3 through 8, reading and English, or in grades 9 and 10, the STAR English 1 EOC or English 2 EOC. The students need to meet passing standard at each of those grade levels on each of those assessments in order to meet that reclassification criteria. For grades where there is no STAR or EOC assessment and a student is presenting the possibility of exit or reclassification, there needs to be a different assessment in place. So in first and second grade, statute calls for a norm-referenced standardized achievement test in reading and language arts where students perform at the 40th percentile or above. And this is a piece of the exit criteria where we need to standardize in compliance with the USDE recommendations under ESSA. And so this is that second part of the RFP discussed in the previous slide, where we need to identify only for use in exit decisions and only for grades 1 and 2, and then you'll see also 11 and 12, we need to identify a single TEA-approved norm-referenced standardized achievement test to be used for those grade levels only and for exit only. Finally, at the bottom of this chart, we see subjective teacher evaluation listed. Once again, the subjective teacher evaluation is one of the criteria listed in statute TEC 29. In the past, the subjective teacher evaluation consisted of a teacher of the English learner being considered for exit, if that teacher bringing a portfolio of work to the LPAC, discussing and giving input in order to contribute to the decision making around whether that student is ready to reclassify or not. As mentioned earlier, the USDE and the under ESSA expressed to us that the subjective teacher evaluation needed to be more standardized statewide. And through our discussions, we identified the need to develop a standardized student exit rubric, as was stated in the ESSA State Plan, but what we are now calling a standardized English learner reclassification rubric. Again, explaining to you how the language of the ESSA plan was to fulfill federal requirements, but that we want to use very Texas-specific language as we develop this rubric, the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. Just as a reminder, the standardized English Learner Reclassification Rubric needs to be implemented in the 2018-2019 school year. However, the single statewide assessments will not come into play in terms of exit criteria until the 2019 and 2020 school year. Here's a little more information about the standardized statewide program exit procedure as it pertains particularly to the subjective teacher evaluation and the TEA-approved student exit rubric. As you can see from the language on the plan, the results of a subjective teacher evaluation using the TEA-approved student exit rubric must be used. And I was just referring earlier to current practice that allows for teachers to utilize a variety of data sources, student portfolio, anecdotal notes, etc., to inform the subjective teacher evaluation portion of the exit criteria, but that beginning in the upcoming school year, 2018-2019, teachers will need to use a single TEA-approved instrument, which in the Texas ESSA State Plan was called the Student Exit Rubric, which we are calling the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, to ensure that we have a standardized statewide exit procedure. We are currently developing that English Learner Reclassification Rubric in timely and meaningful consultation with stakeholders across the state. So let's take a moment to look at the development of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. The purpose for the development of this rubric is, of course, to comply with requirements of ESSA Title III Part A. In addition, it aims to increase statewide consistency in program exit decision-making, and also to develop a standardized rubric to be used statewide for providing that subjective teacher evaluation portion of the program exit or reclassification criteria. Let's look at a timeline here of the TEA English Learner Reclassification Rubric development and implementation. On your screen, you'll see a timeline. The English Learner Reclassification Rubric work has begun with us having held our first stakeholder input session at the ESSA Institute here in Austin on March 27th, 2018. At that first input session, we presented 4 different versions of a reclassification rubric and gathered input from stakeholders. I think it was about 25 representatives from the different region service centers throughout the state gave us input on those 4 versions of the rubric. We then held a second stakeholder input session on April 18th, 2018 at the ACIT conference, again here in Austin. This session had over 50 participants provide input on 2 of the 4 versions that were shared on March 27th. In other words, from all the input we gathered on March 27th through the stakeholder input session number 1, we found that 2 of the 4 versions stood out as being much preferred by the stakeholders. And so those were the 2 that we moved forward and presented at the ACIT conference to over 50 stakeholders. In this group at the ACIT conference, there were a few ESC staff members, but the grand majority of the participants were district program leaders, program directors, and then a few also campus administrators. So we were happy to get some diverse perspectives, ESC as well as district and campus staff. Our next step in the English Learner Reclassification Rubric stakeholder input sessions are still upcoming. We have in the works plans for a session number 3 and a session number 4, in which we will really focus on getting teacher input. We are working with some service centers to identify teacher trainings that are already taking place in the coming month, where we will introduce in the month of May, as a small part of those teacher trainings, we will introduce the 2 rubrics that emerged out of the original 4, and these are the 2 rubrics that were shared at the ACIT conference on April 18th. We will share those with teachers at 2 teacher trainings at different ESCs in order to get that very, very important teacher input on this reclassification rubric. Once we've conducted finished up with the last couple of input sessions with teachers, we will then finalize the EL reclassification rubric and produce training materials to roll out in the summer of 2018 in order to be ready for the full implementation of the rubric in school year 18-19. One thing I did want to share was we will consider that rubric in 18-19 as a pilot year with that rubric. The rubric will be used for 1 year, and we will revisit the rubric at the end of the 2018-2019 school year, and in order to see if there are changes that need to be made or adjustments to that rubric to meet the needs of the students and of the stakeholders as well. We wanted to give you a little more information now about the key guiding principles in the development of the student exit rubric. We gathered as a team and also talked with some stakeholders to identify key guiding principles around the rubric and what it should and should not be and do. Our key guiding principles: the rubric should provide teachers the opportunity to share observation and evidence-based perspectives on an English learner's readiness for reclassification as a non-English learner or as a former English learner or as a fluent English speaker, and the ability to participate in non-linguistically accommodated English instruction in all content areas. Just a comment about non-linguistically accommodated English instruction. We are defining that as instruction in English that is accommodated to the degree it would be accommodated for all students who are English fluent. So if a teacher provides some type of accommodations for all students, then a reclassified English learner would only require that type of accommodation in order to be successful and would not require additional linguistic accommodations to be successful. We also feel the rubric should be user-friendly and minimally burdensome. At the same time, though, providing opportunities for meaningful teacher input in the exit decision-making process. The rubric should be clearly distinct from other instruments used for meeting English learner reclassification criteria, as mentioned earlier, and as viewed on that chart, the TELPAS, the STAR, or the Norm Referenced Achievement Test. We feel the rubric should be clearly distinct from these instruments. The rubric should focus on English language proficiency and the child's need or lack of need for linguistic supports beyond that required of a fluent English speaker. And they should not focus on the child's level of understanding of content per se. After all, we are looking at reclassifying the student in terms of their level of English, not necessarily their content knowledge. And finally, the rubric should invite decision-making that takes into account classroom-based evidence, such as a student's ability to interact meaningfully in classroom discussions, group work activities, and independent work that involves reading, writing, listening, and speaking of academic English. In thinking about these key guiding principles, we feel the rubric should not require teachers to provide information already provided through other criteria, and the rubric should not require a great depth of additional training for teachers to complete efficiently and accurately. As you can see through these guiding principles of what the rubric should and should not do, we really are looking carefully at the stakeholder input in order to ensure that we uphold these guiding principles in the development of the rubric. When developing the rubric, we have many considerations in mind. Some questions that we here in the English Learner Support Team considered or are considering include: which teacher will be responsible for completing the rubric? We have discussed that the certified bilingual or ESL teacher who is serving the student and who has a clear understanding of the student's ability to participate and succeed in classroom instruction should be recommended as one to complete this rubric. Or if on an exception or waiver, we have a teacher who is serving the student who is receiving targeted professional development in accordance with the requirements when applying for an exception or waiver. However, we also want to encourage collaboration with other teachers who also are serving the student when completing the rubric. This is input that we also are seeking through our stakeholders to ensure that we are selecting the appropriate teacher and/or teachers to complete the rubric in the most efficient but also meaningful way. Another consideration when developing the rubric, we asked ourselves, for which students will the rubric be completed? And we have determined that it should be completed only for selected English learners who the teacher and/or the LPAC considers ready for reclassification, and we can provide guidance as to how we ascertain readiness for reclassification. One of those possible signs that a student might be ready for reclassification is that if it's an English learner who achieved TELPAS scores in the advanced and/or advanced high levels in the previous school year, that's one sign that that student might be ready for reclassification. What we want to do here in the area of not being overly burdensome is we are thinking of ways to not require a teacher to complete a rubric for every English learner they serve, as that would be time-consuming and burdensome and might not be meaningful in that there are a group of those students who are not yet even close to readiness for reclassification. Other considerations when developing the rubric include the question we asked ourselves, what documentation is required when using the English Learner Reclassification rubric? Our thoughts at this point are that the LPAC will include in the child's permanent record a copy of the English Learner Reclassification rubric for each student that is being considered for exit. In cases where the teacher indicates on the English Learner Reclassification rubric that an individual student is not yet ready for exit, the teacher will document their reasoning in the space provided on the rubric, and the teacher may also share with the LPAC anecdotal records, student work samples, etc., to support their recommendation. But these supports will be shared during the LPAC meeting, but not stapled or in any way included in the record itself. So in other words, the only document included in the LPAC folder for these students would be a copy of the rubric itself. Another question we are considering is, what weight does the rubric carry in making decisions for reclassification in relation or relative to the other reclassification criteria? The subjective teacher evaluation as per TEC and as documented on the English Learner Reclassification rubric is one of 4 reclassification criteria considered by the LPAC. As such, it may prevent a student from being reclassified. It is one of the many criteria that is considered in the consensus decision of the LPAC. Let's move on to a summary and next steps chart. This chart should look very familiar to you if you were participating in our last webinar, or if you've checked our website, the TEA website, where we have posted a similar version of this chart. I just wanted to hold it up here for a moment to remind you that the 4 weeks rule, the identification of students within 4 weeks rather than 20 school days, does begin in the 2018-19 school year, as well as the implementation of the student exit rubric, what we are now calling the English Learner Reclassification rubric, also to be implemented fully in the 2018-2019 school year. And then the reminder that the move to a single TEA-approved proficiency test for entrance and for exit will not become fully implemented until the 2019 and 2020 school years. One other note that's important we wanted to let you know about is that many of the changes proposed, or excuse me, many of the changes necessitated through the approval of the ESSA State Plan Title III Part A have been proposed in our, have been outlined and included in our proposed revisions to Chapter 89 rule text. As you'll recall, Chapter 89 rule text are the Commissioner's rules that support TEC 29 and help guide you all in the field on how to implement statute for our English learners across the state. The proposed revisions to Chapter 89 is a process that was actually begun back in the late summer, early fall, September of 2017, where we began to gather stakeholder input by formulating a committee of ESC and district leaders to meet with us periodically through a webinar platform and to provide input on what needed to be revised in Chapter 89 in order to align it best to Chapter 29, to TEC 29, and make it more understandable and provide clearer guidance to the field. This process had begun when we heard back from the USDE in December of 2017 about the Texas ESSA State Plan and some revisions that needed to be made to that plan in order for it to gain full approval of the USDE. With all of that occurring, as you'll recall, in December and January, this past December and January, it became clear that we needed to get our proposed revisions to Chapter 89 completed quickly to ensure that we could have our rule text that governs all of our work match what ESSA was asking us to implement, some of it in the 18-19 school year and some in the 19-20 school year. For that reason, we were able to engage in going through the rule text process, the rule text revision process, and we submitted, after a lot of very intensive stakeholder meetings, we have submitted proposed revisions to Chapter 89 to the Data Governance Board, then through rulemaking, and we currently have it posted for public comment for you all to review. The proposed revisions to Chapter 89 were posted for public comment starting on April 20th, and this window for comment is open until May 21st of this year. As you'll see on the slide, we have posted a link to that site where you can review the proposed revisions to Chapter 89. Some of the proposed revisions will look familiar to you as you match them to what we've discussed today here in this webinar with regard to Texas ESSA State Plan. Other revisions included in the proposed revisions to Chapter 89 are clarification, updates, and are not necessarily related directly to the Texas ESSA State Plan Title III Part A. But we do invite you and encourage you to review the proposed revisions to Chapter 89 and post your comments. In addition, next week on May 2nd, we will be holding a public hearing here in Austin, Texas, at the Travis Building from 9 to 11 a.m. It is in room 1.104. I did not list that on the slide and I apologize. So let me repeat, room 1.104 in the Travis Building right here in Austin. May 2nd, 9 to 11 a.m. public hearing in case you or someone you know would like to come to that. As the proposed revisions to Chapter 89 rule text go through the process, after the public comment window has closed and we have responded to public comment, there will be further TEA review, and we have an anticipated official release of the revised Chapter 89 rule text. We anticipate it for July 4th of 2018. Just so you know a little bit more, whoops, I'm going to move on. And then the other big announcement we wanted to make while we have you here as our captive audience is the Title III 2018 Symposium, which is our annual Title III conference held in in Austin. This year, the dates are July 25 and 26. We have a registration link posted for you to get yourselves registered, or your teachers, leaders, colleagues. We also are open right now for presentation proposals, also at that link, and we encourage you to submit proposals to this very, very exciting conference. We also have a call for facilitators in case you want to just facilitate a session to help us out, because as you know, holding a large statewide conference requires all hands on deck. So we appreciate anyone who's willing to work as a facilitator with us. We do really hope to see all of you at the Title III Symposium. It's going to be an exciting couple of days, and we have a lot of new information to share this year. Thank you again for tuning in to this webinar. It has been recorded and it will be made available for viewing on the TEA Bilingual ESL and Title III Part A web pages. Just as last time there was a little lag in time for us to post, I want you to understand that it usually takes us a little time to post because we want to make sure that everything that we post to the web is ADA compliant. So if there's a little lag in time, please bear with us, but you will find these links up. The TEA staff in the Division of English Learner Support, as mentioned earlier, will continue to gather questions submitted during this webinar via the JOT form with the short or the address and the QR code available for you to let us know your thoughts, your questions, and your comments. If you are viewing this webinar as a video recording, you are welcomed as well to submit your comments or questions via the JOT form referenced above. And I'm going to read it one more time just in case anybody needs to jot that down. The JOT form reference is https:// as in farmer, ORM .jot.com/80516023001134. Of course, you can also use the QR code on the right-hand corner of the slide as well. Your questions will be reviewed to inform the compilation of an additional FAQ document if needed to provide further clarification on the ESSA State Plan, Title III, Part A section. Thank you again. Thank you. We so appreciate your attendance today, and we look forward to hearing your comments and questions. Please share with others the fact that this webinar will be posted, and we also and feel free also to share with others the information about the proposed revisions to Chapter 89 and the fact that the public comment window is open and we have a public hearing on May 2nd, 9 to 11 a.m. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you again soon.